travel. And then I get a call from a publisher that had been after me for about 4 years to write a book. And he said, I think you're probably in the cave like the rest of us. So why can't you write a book for me now? And essentially, I couldn't figure out a good reason. So for the most of 2020, I worked from virtually morning till evening to put that book together. And then the publisher looked at it and said, I like this book so much that I'm not going to release it to Amazon or anybody. I think I'm going to do fine with it. And so he has promoted this and has had a staff person scheduling a speaking tour that I've been on here for a short time. And that essentially is kind of what I'm talking to you about today. A lot of people that I've talked to so far said, well, what's the reason for why are you writing the book? One reason, kind of easy and kind of simple, after a lot of my speeches, people would come up to the podium and say, great, where's the book? And I would say, well, I haven't had time to write a book. So that's one of the reasons for sure. And then in the little time we have, I'm going to try to spend some time talking about a contemporary problem, a real problem for all of us, and that is the excessive violence that we're experiencing in our country and what can we do about it. So let me start by saying that I started my career under the first director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who was director of the FBI for almost 50 years. And I think one of the only problems that a lot of us had was that maybe he stayed too long. We were in a period there and getting into the 70s that the FBI was not permitted under Hoover to do any undercover operations. It was very difficult to get to the heart of the mob, for example, through informants if you didn't have firsthand information. And he also didn't want us to get involved in drugs because he thought that would be too big a temptation for agents, and some of them might go on the dark side. So for one reason or another, he didn't want any women in the agents in the FBI. We have women employees, but he didn't want females carrying guns and badges. So that was kind of, he was a rather strong monarch. I'll give you one example of coming out of training school. We had two counselors in our class. And as we were going to meet the director for the first time, they said, the director doesn't like agents with sweaty palms. He thinks that's a sign of weakness and he doesn't like that. So we lined up and the counselors whose very jobs were at risk, if anything happened that would be discouraging to them, and that's what the director didn't like any of the people who were graduating, they squirted us with talcum powder so that we could rub our hands and they wouldn't be sweaty. And the director liked that, and we all made it through and shook hands, and we're off to our first assignment. My first assignment, I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. My first assignment ended up being New Orleans, Louisiana. And I thought, well, that's great. I've never been there. And I thought that would be very interesting. However, I found out, or at least rumored, was that it wasn't really a random choice, that the director had been approached by Reverend King, and Martin Luther had talked to him about the civil rights acts that were being passed around the late 50s and 60s. And he thought that agents in the South might be biased. Our agents living in Mississippi and living in Louisiana might have a bias against enforcing those laws. So the rumor went that he notified the training division hey guys, for the next couple classes, if we have agents coming in from the north, let's send them south so that there wouldn't be any question about any of our agents who live down there being biased. So that's apparently one of the reasons that I got transferred to New Orleans. And we had two states. We had the state of Louisiana and we had the state of Mississippi. And it was like night and day between them. There were a lot more signs in Mississippi that told people because of their color what they could do and what they couldn't do. And New Orleans, of course, was an entertainment metropolis even then. So I enjoyed catching fugitives in New Orleans. But whenever I was sent to Mississippi, I was single at the time. When I was sent there, I was sent basically because of problems, civil rights problems, interviewing victims, investigating hangings, investigating arsons of churches. It was a sad commentary. And by that time, these laws were passed. So the other thing I had to do every time I went to Mississippi, I carried a huge camera in my car that went from the front of the front window to the back window. And the purpose for that was that anytime I went to Mississippi, I stopped at the county clerk's office that I was going through. And they got to know that here he comes, because I was there to photograph voting records to be sure that in the future, according to the laws, everyone was going to have the right to vote. So I really got my fill of civil rights cases. And then I didn't know it at the time, but I would learn that I would be working a lot of civil rights cases in North Carolina and 7 or 8 other assignments I had in the Bureau. But what did I learn there? And I think that interesting because of what we're hearing on the streets today. I learned BLM. I learned Black Lives Matter like nothing else. Our agents were there, that we were being criticized a lot by the locals. They called us the Federal Bureau of Integration. And they didn't treat us well. The waitresses, even the law enforcement offices weren't welcoming to us because they knew, especially in Mississippi, that we were there to enforce the laws. It got rough and we had a lot of battles with the Klan, but truly, I believe that unlike what we're hearing today with some of the people that might not have the right purposes in mind, we truly believe that Black Lives Matter. So I thought that was interesting in my first assignment. And I got transferred to California. And then I was asked to learn to speak Chinese. And then I worked Chinese espionage cases in New York City and then headquarters. But rather than going into all the assignments, the reason that people would ask me for these stories was kind of because some of them were pretty interesting, and they were interesting in almost all these divisions. I think I had first president I met was Richard Nixon. I met him at a Broadway show, actually. Secret Service asked us to, if we could have some FBI agents around a certain theater one evening, and we were there, and then we realized why we were there was to assist Secret Service in protecting the newly elected president, Richard Nixon. He was very affable. We had a very nice chat and met him because he had just been elected, but he hadn't taken office yet. He was in the period there between. And after that, I met every president under different circumstances while I was in the FBI. So it's a job that really puts you in touch with a lot of people. You can be talking to the lowest form of humanity, and then next day you're talking to a bank president, and the next day maybe a president. So I'm going to just focus, and I'll give you a story here from Kentucky. I was transferred to Kentucky. I was the #2 agent in charge of the FBI in Kentucky. they call it that the office an ASAC, ASAC, Assistant Special Agent in Charge. And Kentucky for me turned out to be an extremely valuable experience. There was a lot of corruption in northern Kentucky. There were, we had law enforcement corruption protecting the drugs, and in those days it was more stills where they were making alcohol. But the experience in Kentucky was, excuse me, was amazing. And I'll just pick out two interesting situations I think that you might enjoy. They were both kidnappings. The first one involved a case that started in a southern part of Virginia, right on the border between Virginia and Kentucky. A little girl in elementary school was kidnapped by an escaped federal prisoner, extremely dangerous. And he took her and he took the family car, and eventually the FBI in Virginia was monitoring the phones coming into the residence of the family, and they were getting a call from the kidnapper in Kentucky. He had the little girl down at a park down in the southern part of Kentucky, and he wanted money. He wanted, he already had the car and he had a lot of weapons, but he wanted money, and they were supposed to meet. So the call came to FBI Louisville, where I was the #2 guy, and we deployed a lot of agents from all over Kentucky into that park area. I came down from Louisville, the SAC, the agent in charge, my boss. They flew down in Bureau aircraft, and I had to drive down with lights and siren for 150 miles. That's one of the longer Code 3 runs that I had to make in my career. And we got there and it was starting to get dark, but the agents who were the first deployed noticed the kidnapper and the little girl. And they were walking around the park, and we didn't want to wait till dark. So they put a plan together, and they put one of our female agents. Now remember, there were no female agents until after Mr. Hoover died in 1972. So they had not a lot of experience, but we had one assigned to Kentucky. She was there, and we had one of our senior agents from one of the 8 offices down in the southern part of Kentucky. We decided that rather than try to capture him or surround him or whatever we thought that might endanger the little girl, we put them in maintenance outfits, park maintenance outfits, and had a maintenance vehicle that drove up behind the car with the kidnapper and the victim. And the male agent got out one side, the female got out the other. They approached the car from both sides. As soon as they walked up, they said, "Sir, is there anything, can we help you?" Because he was parked there. And then they saw that the little girl was sitting beside him. So the agent said, "FBI, put your hands on the steering wheel, you're under arrest." He reaches behind to one of his weapons, and the male agent had to tap him a little bit on the side of the head, and he was placed under arrest. But simultaneously, and this is significant, the female agent got in the through the open window on the passenger side, grabbed the little girl, and I don't know how she did it in one moment, excuse me, but she grabbed that little girl and pulled her out of that car and put her on the ground and laid on top of her, and she was safe, and he was under arrest. So we took him away, and I sat with her in the lodge of the park, and she was in there watching cartoons. We called the family in Virginia, and I sat with her several hours while she watched cartoons, maybe took a little nap. And then they arrived. And here came the family, the mayor, the Virginia State Police, the school principal, and who knows how many. It was quite a convoy that arrived, and I learned something there, and that was that every single little life is so important. I guess I knew it, but it really came home when I sat there and saw how that whole town almost came to get this little girl. So they stayed at the lodge overnight. And in the morning, as they were getting ready to go back to Virginia, I asked the little girl, is there anything you would like, anything that we could do for you? And she was shy, of course. And then she whispered to me, well, yesterday when I was walking with that man through the gift shop, I saw one of those Daniel Boone coonskin hats. And the park manager who was sitting there with us jumped out of his seat and led us over to the park gift shop. And she got her coonskin cap and went back to Virginia, happy little girl. I learned a lot on that trip. And quickly, I'll tell you another kidnapping, and it's a little different. Because this doesn't even involve a person. It seems that a horse named Secretariat, excuse me, it seemed like Secretariat was in Kentucky, and he was down in stud in the Lexington area at Claiborne Farms, and he was entertaining females for about $200,000 clip. And it happened that the horse of the year from Canada was down with him. Her name was Fanfreluche. And one night, somebody came up to one of the fences where they were out, or at least Fanfreluche was out, and they put a path of straw down inside the fence and enticed Fanfreluche into a vehicle and kidnapped her. And this was a horse of the year from Canada. And this made international headlines, and we were just covered up by inquiries about what happened. We were working with the Kentucky State Police. And again, long story short, because we don't have a lot of time, but eventually it got so hot for whoever kidnapped them because we put up the wall so quickly. We had all the ports covered, all the airports, all the seaports. We had it pretty well covered, so they didn't get a chance to get Fanfreluche further than across the state line into Tennessee, which made it a federal crime, interstate transportation of stolen property, ITSP. So we had a call that there was a strange horse across in this covered area, just across the line in Tennessee. We responded, and that sure enough, from her heading, her forehead markings, it was Fanfreluche, and she was still with child, and they rolled out the royal ambulance that they have. They have an ambulance for that class of horse with a chandelier in it and all kinds of fancy fitting. So they gave her first class treatment. They got her back. She stayed healthy. She had the baby. And I was honored after that to be called over to Claiborne Farms by the owners. And they said, Mr. Pence, but we'd like you to have a little time with Secretariat. And I was honored. They let me have the reins. Of course, they said, don't try to board her or him. He is very spirited, and you aren't going to do well if you try to get on board. So I took the reins and I walked around the area of their paddock, and I didn't really know what to say. It was kind of a one-sided conversation, but I did say that yeah, we recovered your girlfriend, and she's fine, and everything seems going well. And he looked at me, and of course, all he did was roll his head up and down. He was. I said, I think you're pretty happy, and I enjoyed the little time I had. And then they gave me a beautiful portrait of Secretariat to keep. So those were two kidnaps, and they were kind of different, but they were kidnappings. The second one caused a little uproar with the Congress because if you remember back in those days, there was a myth really going around that kids were being kidnapped by strangers, and they had their pictures on milk cartons and everywhere. All ads were showing massive kidnappings of little kids by strangers. And it really wasn't happening. The kidnappings that we were investigating were normally one parent taking the child against the court order of the other parent. Anyway, they were not kidnappings, but they were children that were missing. But anyway, the criticism came from Congress that what was the FBI doing investigating the theft of a horse when little kids all over the world were being kidnapped? And of course, it was apples and oranges really, because we were investigating a major theft, interstate transportation of we considered the horse stolen property. But that's how politics goes sometimes. Anyway, those are two cases, kind of interesting, and I could give you a lot more from the state of Kentucky as well as these other places, but I want to spend the little time we have left to talk about something a lot more interesting right now and a lot more troubling. And that is this troubling problem we have right now with excessive violence in police officers feeling they need to shoot quicker and more often maybe than they used to. And so what's the reason? What's really causing all this? And I think there are so many that I could go on and on about the single parent families, the no parent families, the kids that are subjected to drugs and alcohol, the gang problems, the fact that a lot of kids are involved, and although that scientifically it's been proved that someone who is not of age, who's not an adult, who is in possession of a gun and uses it, is unconstitutional to sentence that person to death or to life imprisonment, because they have proved scientifically that the adolescent brain isn't developed sufficiently enough that they should be responsible totally for firing that weapon. And as you all know, that weapon is a very disciplined tool. All you got to do is pull that trigger and it reacts immediately. If you've got it in the hands of a kid who's not enough brain power to know right from wrong, as the Supreme Court found, it's very troubling. So we're having a lot of shootings from young people. I get notifications every day from hotspots around the country, like New York, the city of New York alone, and I'll spend a couple minutes. There are so many homicides. Almost every day there's going to be a shooting and usually a homicide in almost all 5 boroughs. You've got mental ill people. We've got beheadings going on. We've got people being knifed. Excuse me, being knifed, and if they don't have a knife, they have an ice pick, and they're going after elderly a lot, and they're going after a lot of Asian people now because of the pandemic and where the blame is being put. In any event, the violence in New York is epidemic, and it's unbelievable. And while we're having that, we have police officers that are leaving the job because they're not getting support. And you have other officers that are committing suicide. So the violence And I think one of the big problems is the mental illness that we have right now. And the pandemic is causing increased mental problems to even people that prior to this did not have mental problems. But I remember a study we did back around the turn of the millennium, the year 2000, a publication that came out that said that based on some studies, more than 50% of all the kids incarcerated in the juvenile facilities had diagnosable mental illness, and they were trying to medicate themselves. So they were using drugs or alcohol. But those kids aren't going to be kids forever. So now they're adults, a lot of them. So what are we doing with the problem that we have with mental illness in this country? It's astronomical, the problems. And one reason I think that this is all happening is because of a lack of liquor. Liquor, LCR, LCR. I call it liquor. Love, care, and respect. And this country has a lot of loss of that. And the book that you have available, if you're interested, is going to talk a lot about the LCR, the liquor, and the respect. And it's going to talk about the respect that's not being shown to law enforcement, and that law enforcement is not necessarily showing to some of the victims. It's hard to determine which of these came first. But I can tell you, law enforcement is concerned that they're being ambushed. And the one main thing that I see when I'm looking at body cameras and looking at car cameras, because there's a lot of video out there now. And the one common thing that I see in all of these incidents is that an officer gave an order or made a request. Sir, can you get out of the car? Or sir, can you keep your hands on the steering wheel? Or sir, please don't put your hands in your pocket. And instead of getting somebody to comply with that, somebody's pulling a weapon, shooting at them, or they're running, or they're getting into a high-speed chase that ends up with fatal accidents involving a lot of innocent people. The LCR factor has got to be honored, and we've got to get it back. And and I'll finish after I get a little water here. I'm going to finish with a quote from a 19th century poet, American poet named Carl Sandburg. I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He said something that I heard a few years ago, and I believe it with all my heart. He said, when a nation goes down or a civilization ceases to exist, one thing can always be found. They forgot where they came from. They lost sight of what brought them along. And I can think quickly of three areas where this is in play right now. One, we have people now talking about canceling our culture. If we forget about the Confederate leaders and the Confederate soldiers because they lost or because they did something that we don't think is right, I don't think that's the way to do it. I think we need to remember our mistakes so that we don't remake them. I think we need to remember the 1921 Tulsa race shootings so that we don't repeat that type of thing. I think cancel culture, I don't believe, is the answer. The other one, unfortunately, involves our own FBI. I think a few years ago, during our last election, When Mr. Hoover built the FBI in 1924, got rid of the political hacks and brought in people based on merit, I think that established a standard for us that has stood many years. And I believe during that last election, the FBI stepped across the line. And I think we had some people fired. We had people retired. We had the FBI director fired. And I think the FBI has got to stay non-political. And I think in that case, it was a small group. I've talked to so many people before and after that. I'm convinced that the 99% of the FBI agents are doing exactly what they're supposed to do according to the Constitution. But a small group apparently did get involved in political situation, and it has to be rooted out and has to be stopped. And the final thing for the last few minutes, and I don't necessarily mean this in a religious sense, but it's very much in a religious and it's very much historical. This nation, on its way down, it seems right now a little bit, is losing the fact that this nation came to our country and they brought God with them. And now it seems there's so many instances where they're trying to get rid of God. You know, we, in World War II, well, even before that, we had God in everything. When we swear somebody in, when our money and our, God was part of it. And even going into the 1950, 1954, and you repeated it today, the Pledge of Allegiance, we added under God in 1954. So we were still talking about God. We had God as our co-pilot in World War II. Then we were saying, praise God and pass the ammunition during the hit from the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. And now we like to say, well, have a happy holiday. We don't say Merry Christmas. And we forget about the fact that Easter eggs and Easter egg hunts are for Easter, not spring egg hunts, as a lot of the schools now are pushing. So I think we have got to remember how we got here and don't forget what brought us along. Another thing that brought us along that I don't have time to discuss much with you, but the gun issue. And the guns were part of our society and they've always have been. So I think that the people still enjoy the right to have arms. The Second Amendment is a good amendment, but you have to figure out a way to keep them from the hands of the people that are using them wrong. And those are young people. These people that don't have that mental development yet, they've got to figure out a way to keep guns from being used to go into a school and kill people, or to go up to the top of a building and just mow all the people down on the street. So I think the amendment's good, but I think something, and wise heads on both sides of the politics have got to figure out how to keep them in the right hands. And the final thing I'll leave with you is in 1831, a Frenchman, a noble Frenchman named get his name, Alexis de Tocqueville. He was here to study the prison system in the United States in 1831. And in 1835, he loved this country so much that he wrote a treatise called Democracy in America. And it has become a standard for how this country operates. And one of his quotes, he had a lot of quotes, he was a brilliant writer, but one of his quotes was, America is great because America is good. And at that point that America is no longer good, she will no longer be great. Now we've got a lot of fine people in this country, and we've got to use those people to keep the FBI, and to keep all the rest of the society that we enjoy from continuing to forget what brought us along and to keep us not only good, but great. And that's, folks, is all the time I have today. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. We do have a minute for a couple of questions. So if
Okay.
you have a question, unmute and may ask your question. Go ahead, Ned.
Mr. Prince, thank you so much. Your words are very encouraging, or thoughtful anyway. Question for you. I read that, crime statistics have been going down prior to the pandemic, and of course now they're turning around. Would you comment on that? I mean,
Yeah, I think that a lot of people look at crime rates, and I don't entirely believe in the crime rates, because it has a lot to do with crime's going to go down in the winter if it's a severe winter because the bad guys aren't out much. Crime is going to it's going to go up and down based on some. I don't look at crime rates, but I think if you look at the situation now that we have, and the pandemic has exacerbated it, but when you look at the situation we have and you factor in the amount of mental illness we have that we're dealing with, and the amount of the weaponry that is out there available, I think anybody that says the crime rates are going down in this country right now, I don't think that would be accurate. I think you have to look at the current situation and what might be the influencers that are making homicides go up. I mean, homicide is normally something that doesn't have anything to do with weather or anything else. It has to do with personal situations. And when you have people that are husbands killing wives, and right now we have an awful lot of domestic violence, and that's what the police are responding to. And then they're being attacked as they respond to the domestic violence. We have an awful lot of children being involved right now. We have shootouts going on in New York at around Times Square. Of course, they're going on in some of the lower income areas where the crime rates have always been high, but they're happening now all over the city of New York, right in the middle of the tourist area there on 42nd Street. And they care less about, they're after maybe somebody that killed one of their gang members yesterday. Now they're going to kill the shooter, but they don't care about collateral damage. And what's happening is the tourists, and especially a lot of young kids and children, are being shot, not always killed, but they're being wounded. And that's just New York. I mean, I could tell you what's going on in Chicago or San Francisco, and very similar things. So it's a very dangerous time. And certainly I wouldn't encourage anybody to think that the crime rates are going down right now.
Okay. One more quick question, then we got a break. Al.
Yes, I'm here just to give Bob a pitch for his book. Bob Barron sent me a copy of it. I read it. It's a terrific book. Your stories are a good part of the book, but another good part is the structure of the FBI and the fact that all agents are called special agents. And it's a terrific book, and I recommend everybody to get a copy of this book and read it. It's an introduction to the FBI that we never knew anything about.
Okay, well, thanks, Al, for that. And as I said, in the next Roarings, we'll have the link that Bob, that you can purchase Bob's book. So, Bob, thank you so much for joining us and your talk. Little clapping and wave handing.
Thank you. It was really, really good.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, folks.
Okay, Lori, take us home.
Okay, let's see. You're going to put the flag up, I guess.
Well,
We all know what we're saying, right?
yeah, we all know what we're saying.
Okay, I'm proud to be an American
American
citizen.
citizen.
God
God
help
help me do my
Do my
duty.
duty as such.
Okay. Thanks so
you,
much.
everybody.
See you again in 2 weeks. All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye.
We're done.
We're done.
Be done.
Bye-bye. See you next time.
Thank you so much. That was so amazing. Mr. Pence,
It was, yeah.
amazing, very concerning, and maybe that's one of the reason that I reach out to my companions. I myself face a lot of challenges, even where the place where I live, the residence where I live. I'm a foreign, and I'm alone here.
Yeah.
I am alone. So since I'm divorced, even my ex-husband took my child in the middle of those confusion and politics and stuff. He used all this to took my child away from me. So you see my smile, my happiness that comes from what Mr. Pence was saying, from God. I supposed to be in the cemetery or in the crazy people, but I hold my hand so tightly and my spirit in God that he makes me smile all the time. And I said, this is smile. It comes from the Holy Spirit. It doesn't come from whatever. And I think what everything he said is very important for us to think about, especially not to be innocent about the madness that is circulating, that is all over, and that we have to place ourselves in a position that, since we like to help, also because we like to help, it doesn't mean that we don't suffer attacks. Yes, we do, right? But, anyways, I have so much more to talk and
Well, welcome.
to share. And usually I do my charities and I don't tell anybody, just in silence, but I do by myself. So that's also another reason I said I don't want to just be doing things all by myself. I have to be in a corporate, in a place where we all together, we can reunite and do things together. So
Okay.
Thanks,
Well,
Maria.
thank you.
thank you so much.
Okay,
Bye.
well, Denny, just let you know, I'm meeting with Holly in an hour, and what Kathleen put together is excellent, and we'll wrap it up. So tell her thank you, and we'll finalize it this week.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting. So bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye. Please keep me updated.